Alright, today we are going to dive into side, and side angle side proofs. Make sure you have that reference sheet out, so you should already have this. Remember, this is where we're going to go to get all of our reasons. So reasons triangles are congruent are any of the big five. Reasons sides are congruent, we only have 3. One's a signal word for midpoint. And reasons angles are congruent, we only have 6. And we have a signal word for parallel and a signal word for angle bisector. Alright, so every proof is going to start off with something that is given to you. This is how we can start our proof. So we have our given statements. We have 3 given statements. Notice that they are all in the first 3 boxes. So your given statements always start off with proof. And your reason for that is going to be that it's given to you. So we saw that on our reference sheet. At any time, if you need to pause to catch up with writing, please do that. What we're trying to prove always goes in the last slot of your proof. That's what you're trying to end with, so it's going to go in your last slot. Alright, as soon as we have started out, so this is our basic framework. Put your givens in, what you're proving, and then if you notice, we don't have as many boxes left to do. Let's mark up our triangle based off what they tell us. So PQ is congruent to ST, QR is congruent to RT, and then they tell me that I have a midpoint on PS. So my R is in the middle. Well, if we remember, midpoint means it cuts it in half. So I know that my PRS and RS are going to be congruent. And if you look, that is my statement happening at statement 4. Right above, you see the word midpoint. I told you in the reference sheet that midpoint is a signal word. It's going to signal to use it. It's going to signal to use definition of midpoint. And then if we look at our triangle and we look at our marks, we notice that we have 3 sides in one triangle, congruent to 3 sides in another. So we are congruent by side, side, side. All right, let's try another one. Again, our given statements always go at the very beginning. So my statements are blank this time. The last one started with our reasons being blank. So those need to go in my first 2 boxes. So go ahead and write those in. Our givens always start us off in our first 2 boxes. And then what we're trying to prove always goes in our very last slot. So go ahead and write that in our very last slot, what we're trying to prove. And then we have to fill in the in-between. So let's put our marks on our triangle so we know what we're dealing with. I'm dealing with JL congruent to MN. And then I see that K is the midpoint of 2 different segments. It's the midpoint of JN and of LN. And if you notice, midpoint's my signal word. Since it's of 2 segments, you're going to notice that you actually are using definition of midpoint twice. So if it's in the middle of JN, that means JK and KN are congruent. It's going to be cutting that in half there. And it also means, since it's in the middle of LM, that LK and KM are also congruent because it's in the middle, cutting those in half as well. So those would be the statements that we would fill in for using definition of midpoint. And if you look at my triangle, I have 3 congruent sides in each triangle, so I am using side, 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 and I can count. Proofs will normally look more like number 3, where you don't have as much information to start off with, so you only have something in box 3. But remember, you always start with your given statements. They always take up the beginning boxes depending on how many you have. So since I have 2, I'm going to put those first 2 statements in my proof, and the reason for those is because they were given to me. So for my reason, I'm just going to write given. What I'm trying to prove always goes in that last box. So box 4, I'm putting what I'm proving. And if you notice, based off what they gave us, we have all of our statements done. And we just actually have 2 boxes to do. So if I mark up my triangle, AC is congruent to AD, CB is congruent to BD. And then they tell me AB is congruent to AB. Well, there's no signal words in this, and if I look at my box for sides congruent to sides, reason sides are congruent, I can either say given, definition of midpoint, but that needs to have a signal word of midpoint, or I can say reflexive property. Remember, reflexive property means it's in both triangles, so that would be the case here. That segment, AB, is in both of my triangles, so reflexive property there for my reason. And then my triangles have 3 tick marks for a triangle. All sides are congruent, so I'm congruent by side, side, side. All right, looking at side, angle, side now. So this is just that our proofs are going to be dealing with the angle being tracked in between our 2 sides. So remember that angle has to be tracked. Again, my given statements are always the first few boxes. So here we're back to where they have filled out all of our statements. The givens went at the very beginning. So my reason there is going to be given. What you're trying to prove always goes at the very end. And then we have to fill out the rest. So let's go to our tick marks. Always start with your tick marks. JM congruent to NL. All right, now we have an angle. You need to make sure that you trace that angle so you get it in the right spot. So we're looking at angle J, M to N. So I am sitting right here. And we are looking at angle L to N to M. So I'm up there at N. All right, and then if you look at the other thing they tell you MN is congruent to MN. Those are 2 sides congruent. If I go to my box for reason sides are congruent, it wasn't given to me. I don't see midpoint, so that leaves the reflexive property. It is shared in both triangles. So my reason there would be reflexive property. And then if I look at my marks, I have 2 sides at an angle. That angle is tracked between them, so my triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. All right, if we look at number 2, they have given you all the reasons, and you are coming up with the statements. Again, those first few givens go at the very beginning. So I have 2 given statements. They should go in my first 2 boxes. What I'm trying to prove always goes in that very bottom box. And then we fill in the rest. So let's put our tick marks on there. AB is congruent to BC. And then I'm told that BD bisects angle ABC. So BD, this segment right here, bisects ABC, this blue angle. Bisects means to cut in half. Bisects is also one of your signal words. Bisects is going to tell you you need to use angle bisector. So remember, if you're cutting that blue angle in half, each side is going to be congruent. So each side of that green segment of the angle is going to be congruent. Now naming them is where it's important. Trace it out. You need to name one of them, angle A to B to D. And then you should name the other one, angle C to B to D. Because that orange and purple is going to make up that original blue angle. So ABD, congruent to angle CBD. The last thing they tell me is they're looking for a reason to use the reflexive property. Remember, that means it's the same side in both triangles. If you notice, they're sharing that BD segment. So BD would have to be congruent to BD because of the fact that it is in both triangles. So that is our reason for that reflexive property. All right, this is what your proofs will normally look like. Less blanks filled in, and you're coming up with more statements and reasons, a combination of both. So your first statement always goes in the first box, your given statement. So B is the midpoint of W, Z, and X, Y. That should be the first one. And the reason that you get to use it is that it's given to you. We can't put any marks on our triangle so far, but we do see that we have a signal word. Our signal word is midpoint. is of two segments, so you should use it twice. So V is in the middle of WZ. That means it's going to cut WZ in half on each side of V. So if you notice, I see that WV congruent to VZ is in box 2. So obviously I need to use my signal word, and I need to use definition of midpoint in order to say that those two are congruent. I'm going to skip down to box 4 for the flow of the problem. It's the midpoint also of XY. So that means my XV and VY have to be congruent. If you notice, that's where they put the second definition of midpoint. So you need to use the second set of segments that it's cutting in half. Don't use the same segments again. You need to make sure that you're actually using the other one it's cutting in half. The last thing is I'm looking at here, and oh guys, we forgot to put in our proof card. So remember, you always put what you're trying to prove in that last box. Makes it a little less daunting. Alright, now, I'm looking at my picture. I have no reasons I can add tick marks for sides. The only reason you can add tick marks for sides is midpoint, which we maxed out, and the reflexive property, but they're not sharing a side. So I'm looking at angles. For angles, I don't have parallel lines. They didn't tell me I didn't have parallel lines. I don't have an angle bisector. They didn't say that. But my picture has two intersecting lines and angles on either side. So I, from my picture, can add marks for vertical angles. So now we just need to name those angles properly. So I can name one WVX, and I can name the other one ZVY. Notice the middle letter is the same on both of those. So angle WVX and angle ZVY. That middle is that vertex, so it needs to be the one that they are sharing together. All right, last one. So start it off. Put your givens in the first two slots because I have two givens. And our reason is that they are given to us. Put what you're trying to prove in the last box. And then let's work it out from there. So for tick marks, I can add marks on HI congruent to GJ. And then I see a signal word in parallel. So parallel is going to tell me, look for an angle-pair relationship. They tell me the angles this time. So my parallel lines are HI and GJ. Jump on your transversal. That transversal has to intersect both lines and be in both triangles. So the only transversal you can choose is HJ. The angles that they give you are angle GJH. So we're going to give you this angle right here. And they give you angle IHJ. So we're going to give you this one right here. Well, those two angles that they give you are alternate interior angles. So that would be the reason why they're congruent. And you did use that signal word in parallel. For parallel, your signal lets you choose between alternate interior, alternate exterior, and corresponding, depending on what you have. The last thing I see is I see my two triangles are touching, and they tell me I'm using my reflexive property. So those two sides that they're sharing, HJ would be congruent to HJ, because they both are sharing that segment. And then if I look at my marks, I have two sides congruent with an angle trapped between it. So I have side, angle, side. All right, guys, that would be all for your side angle side notes. Please bring any questions to class tomorrow.